You're sitting down with someone like an Eli Manning and listening to the words he's using, the phrases he's using, and maybe just tweaking them just a little bit. Is that what that looks like?
Yeah, it looks like that, and then some. It looks like examining carefully his performance week by week, teasing out and filtering out all the little gems of his performance, whether it was a winning performance or a losing performance.
Hey there, and welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. It was my privilege today to interview Dr. Nate Zinsser. Yes, the author of this book, The Confident Mind.
You already know. My passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. TJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com.
You see, The Confident Mind, what an amazing book, but so is Dr. Zinsser. We talk about, hey, what are those attributes? What are those thought processes? What are those strategies that can take your performance to the next level? That's what the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast is all about. And I was so privileged to bring someone with such background and so forth and knowledge to dive into these concepts and put some meat behind the concepts and make it more real. And you know what? In this interview, Doc Z does just that as we go through and explain some of the concepts in here and some personal concepts which he helps clarify and so forth. So you're going to love this interview. So listen, if you're watching this on video, hey, I invite you to subscribe wherever you're watching this. I'd love to have you a part of my community. And if you're listening to this because you downloaded it from iTunes or iHeartRadio or Spotify or wherever else the podcast is listed, I hope you are a subscriber as I regularly put out positive content, motivational videos, and of course, success interviews like this. So without any further ado, let's jump right into this interview.
Dr. Zinsser, welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast.
DJ, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I tell you what, on this podcast, we attract some high professional, some of the best in their industries, top leaders, educators, coaches, athletes, celebrities, and so forth. And I tell you what, when the publisher sent me your book, The Confident Mind, I tell you what, it obviously attracted me. And so when I did a little research on you and so forth, I thought, well, this is amazing. And just for the audience sake, let me just say, it says here on the back, Dr. Nate Zinsser is the director of the Performance Psychology Program at the United States Military at West Point, the most comprehensive mental training program in the country. All right, Dr. Zinsser, or Doc Z as you're told sometimes. Share with me, let's just start. Give us a little bit of your backstory. Would you do that?
Sure. I'd be happy to. And again, thanks for the invite. I am a guy who was fascinated with human performance. I wanted to be a standout athlete in my younger days. I didn't have the physical equipment to, excel in the sport of football, but I did just fine at wrestling and lacrosse. I was a New Jersey Independent School State champ. And it was through my experiences as an athlete that I got a glimpse into how powerful the mind really is. I went to this relatively small boys' private day school, and this school had a powerhouse soccer team. Year after year after year, this soccer team ruled the state. And remarkably, that was the only team at the school that was consistently good year after year after year. And again, this is back in the days when high school athletes played 2 and often 3 sports. And so you could take half the soccer team, put them on the basketball court, put them on the lacrosse field, put them on the baseball diamond, and they were lousy. But they were great soccer players. And I kind of wondered how that was possible. Because every Friday there would be signs all over the school, come watch the soccer team beat so-and-so. There was this buzz about the team. There was this energy about the team. There was this mystique about the team that seemed to persist year after year after year. And I didn't realize it at the time, but what was going on was basically a very powerful self-fulfilling prophecy or team-fulfilling prophecy that surrounded this team. And the coach was able to create an understanding for the boys coming up through the younger grades that if they persisted with their training and went to a summer camp or two, by the time they were in 10th, 11th, 12th grade, they had a really good shot at being the starters. And so his team was always loaded with experienced players, not because they were just ridiculously talented, athletes, but because they had persisted and because they believed in themselves. And as I mentioned, this was the only team at the school that had this vibe, this mystique, this aura about itself. And I remember sitting at the lunch table one day when I was in the 9th grade. And I was, on the wrestling team. And it seemed like we had a couple other really good quality wrestlers in my class. And so I was explaining this to a couple other guys in my class, saying, I think we got some talent. I think in a couple of years, you give us some experience, we're going to be really good. And this guy in my class looked across the table from me and said, Nate, shut up. You're never going to be any good. Guys at this school don't wrestle well. We're good at soccer. We're sometimes good at swimming. We're sometimes good at tennis, but we're not good at wrestling and we never will be. So shut up. And I sat back in my chair and wondered, who gave this guy the crystal ball? How does he know that? But it was just such a clear example of how your expectation, your belief in yourself really carries out, really expresses itself in the real world of human performance. Now, the guy who said that, in a way, was right, because the wrestling team at my school had been a doormat for the last decade.
Right.
But I'm proud to say that in my junior year, my 11th grade year, our wrestling team had the first winning season in a really long time, and we had another winning season my senior year. And it wasn't necessarily because we were such talented individuals, although I think we had some, but it was more a matter that we didn't buy into the belief that we couldn't be good. We established a different set of expectations for ourselves, and it found expression on the mat. That was my first sort of window into what is now called sports psychology, this whole discipline that looks at the role of your attitudes, your beliefs, and your minute-by-minute thought process as it relates to your athletic performance. And I have continued to explore that ever since. I was a pretty good technical mountain climber in my college years. I did a couple of hairy first descents in Alaska with a fellow named John Krakauer, who is a literary celebrity. I have trained in Japanese martial arts for 47 years. I have senior black belts. And everywhere I've gone, in addition to getting a PhD in sports psychology from the University of Virginia, everything I've experienced just reinforces how important it is for you to win a victory over doubt, fear, et cetera, before you can win a victory in the boardroom, in the operating room, on the concert stage, or on the wrestling mat, or whatever other field of friendly strife you might care to inhabit. How's that for a backstory?
I love it. I mean, the whole concept is something like you've been living for couple decades now, about the concept of unleash your greatness within, right? This is the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. When I wrote If You Think You Can, it was always about this, what you write in your book. It was always about, you said this in your book, are you as good at your job, your profession, your passion as you could be? Would your life be different if you won your first victory? So I was going to have you define what the first victory was. And it sounds like you just said it, right? You've got to have that belief first that possibility exists, and then follow it up with action. Would you add or tweak any of that I just said?
I'll just tweak it very carefully. I I came upon the concept of first victory as part of my reading in Asian philosophy, martial arts history. The Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu, author of a very famous book entitled The Art of War, specified in The Art of War that victorious warriors win first and then go into battle, while losing warriors go into battle and then hope to win. That was the genesis of the term first victory. You win this first victory in your own mind, in your own heart, before you take the physics final exam, before you go out to kick that potential game-winning field goal, before you step onto the stage to play the Brandenburg Concerto on the trumpet.
Right. No, love that. Love that. Okay, so how does that tie in? I was just curious, little side note here. So now you work at West Point, right? And you provide the mental training program there and so forth. What does that look like? What are you We'll get into some of the concepts of the book. So we don't need to jump too much in the concepts yet because we're going to go there. But what does that look like on a daily basis over there with the cadets?
It consists of me holding individual meetings with cadets who are seeking a mental edge and the ability to, as you would put it, unleash their own greatness. Right. Many of them are intercollegiate Division I athletes who have dreams of being an All-American or a national champion. Some of these cadets have dreams of being elite military performers, excelling in Army Ranger School, eventually going on to Special Forces assessment. Some of these cadets are struggling with the demands of West Point. And let me tell you, this is not your average undergraduate institution. This is a federally funded military service academy. You are carrying a very high academic load, 18, 20 credit hours in some cases. You have a job in the Corps of Cadets to be the officer responsible for certain other cadets, the officer responsible for certain functions within your company. On top of that, there is mandatory physical training, mandatory physical fitness testing, mandatory summer military training. And on top of that, maybe you want to be a Division I college tennis player, soccer player, wrestler, lacrosse player, boxer, rugby player, you name it. So it's a pressure cooker. And a lot of cadets, understandably so, struggle with the demand. And so I have worked with many cadets who are seeking to unleash as much greatness as they can in order to, in some cases, pass the mandatory physical fitness test, pass the mandatory survival swimming course, pass the annual indoor obstacle course test, all of these things that are graduation requirements that require a heck of a lot of skill and a heck of a lot of confidence in your skill.
Love it. Love it. And by the way, your work is not limited to West Point, because here at the bottom of your book, you have an endorsement by Eli Manning. Let me just read it out loud. It says, "Studying confidence with Dr. Zinsser helped me win 2 Super Bowls." Wow, you can't pay for that. That's amazing. He goes on to say, "I recommend The Confident Mind, this book, to competitors everywhere." Eli Manning, 2-time Super Bowl MVP. So when you're working with people, are you finding that you're doing some of the concepts we'll talk about, but helping them with visualization, helping them replace some of that stinking thinking, if you will, into something that's more effective, that is will be more effective and align with their future goals better than the current reality of what they're saying? I mean, is that just you're sitting down with someone like an Eli Manning and listening to the words he's using, the phrases he's using, and maybe just tweaking them just a little bit? Is that what that looks like?
It looks like that, and then some. It looks like examining carefully his performance week by week, teasing out and filtering out all the little gems of his performance, whether it was a winning performance or a losing performance, looking for the best in himself, learning what he can from them, being honest about what he perhaps needs to prepare differently for or execute differently in the upcoming games, and then really just strengthening that overall sense of certainty in himself so that when he is on the field, play after play, series after series, quarter after quarter, he can step up to the line of scrimmage and be relatively unconscious in his execution.
Okay, there's
he knows the intended routes of his receivers. He knows the expected defensive strategy of the opponents, and then he has to trust his training, trust his talent to identify the right person to throw to at the exact right moment, all the while maintaining his personal safety, because about 1,500 pounds of angry human being is churning, breathing down his neck, literally trying to knock the crap out of him.
That's correct. Wow. It's a detailed process, and I understand it in depth. I tell you what, that is pretty cool that you're having the opportunity to do that. How would you define confidence? Give it to our listeners. If you were just to define it in a nutshell, what would you define it as?
Okay. The definition that I work with and that I explain in the book is very simple, a little unconventional, but simple. Confidence is the sense of certainty that you have in any particular ability that allows you to bypass conscious thought and execute that ability more or less unconsciously, without telling yourself how to do it, without preoccupying yourself with the mechanics, without concern for the results or the implications of the results. You put your eyes on a target and you execute, more or less unconsciously, the same way you are when you tie your shoes, which is a complicated human activity involving lots of nerves, lots of muscles, lots of joints, lots of sensory receptors. But at one point in your life, you decided, okay, I got this. I don't have to think about it anymore. And you don't. It's that same degree of certainty that allows the concert violinist to play with the greatest degree of technical precision and beautiful emotion. It's the same degree of certainty that allows a heart bypass surgeon or a heart replacement surgeon to place those staples properly in the small window of time that he's got. It's what allows the soccer player to sense the movement of 8 other women on the field and make the pass at the right moment to the right person, and then move into the right position to support the offensive surge.
Love that. That's really powerful. I did notice in your book as I was reading it, great book, by the way, when I was reading it, you talked a lot about that unconscious. You said all this is done without conscious deliberation or analysis, bypass conscious thought. So you got to get to the, so does that happens? That through repetition of thinking, but also repetition in play or repetition in the skill. And it's just repetition until it becomes natural and you accept it as, okay, I'm good. I'm certain that I can do a good job at this without really thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And then it's just about taking it to that next level. Anyway, Any thoughts there?
Well, and the trick is acknowledging that you do indeed have the skill, the competence, once you actually have it. You know, human performance is a matter of both competence and confidence. My experience has been that people tend to sell their level of competence short. They have actually a greater ability than they give themselves credit for. They're constantly undermining their level of competence. And as a result, even though they might be able to lift 100 pounds, they doubt themselves, so we only see them lift 80 pounds.
Yes.
And I would rather have somebody who, okay, I know I can lift 80, and they're going to deliver that 80, as opposed to somebody who says, well, you know, I probably have the ability to lift 90, but I only believe that I can lift 70. So I'm always going to underperform.
I love that. I don't know. You bring it up in the book, Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
Powerful. I love his work. I love his life experience, his history, and the breakthroughs that he had. But there's a video out there that shows him talking to a student body. I'm sure you've seen it. We don't need to dive too much into it, but he's speaking to a student body in front of him. And he talks about viewing yourself in an ideal way. Mm-hmm. And he says, he gets up on the chalkboard and he puts an X over here. He says, if you want to fly from here, from here to here, he says there's something in aviation that's called crabbing. And it basically means you fly above where you want to end up. He goes, in that video, he goes, you overestimate yourself, because in aviation, you end up falling exactly where you are. If you aim directly to the point, you will typically, your result will be lower than the target you want to hit. So you
that's called friction in physics. It works. It drags you down. That's called physics. That's why you got to shoot a little higher, and Frankl was so articulate in the way he was able to maintain his sense of self under the most appalling, degrading circumstances that any of us can imagine. And I hope nobody ever gets close to it. But he was able to see himself in that comfortable classroom, lecturing to a group of interested, motivated students on the psychology of the concentration camp. He was able to take his mind to a place substantially different from where his physical body was at the time. And that is a lesson in mental toughness, mental effectiveness for us all.
100%. I'll just add to that story just a little bit, just to say that Viktor Frankl, that aha moment that he could separate his physical conditions from his thought or his consciousness was when he was in the chambers and they shaved, the research shows, they shaved all the hair off every part of his body. And he sat there alone for several hours. He ended up not going into the gas chamber. He survived Auschwitz. And, but it was in that moment, he said, in my darkest moment is when he had that aha moment that one can choose there. And he said it much better, but anyone, no matter the circumstance, has a choice in their attitudes. Any thoughts on that?
Those prisoner of war experiences are lessons that I think a lot of us should pay attention to.
Yes.
The acknowledgement of, wow, I'm in a lousy, bad, terrible place, but I will not let it determine my attitude. I will maintain a sense of purpose for myself, value in myself, and I'm going to deal with my present situation, but I'm always going to be thinking about where I want to be. My eyes are still on the prize, even though my body is still in the prison cell.
Very good. Very good. You talk about how you say casually confidence can appear as arrogant.
Oh, yeah.
And then you talk about Drew Brees, and I love this quote, so I'm just going to read it. You said, Drew Brees said, I'm a very modest person, right? We sometimes have this image that confident people have this outward expression that's really confident and so forth. But this, I think, is really powerful, what Drew Brees said. I'm a very modest person, Brees told interviewer Steve Croft on 60 Minutes in 2010, but I'm also extremely confident. And if you put me in the situation or in the moment, I'm going to have some swagger. I'm going to have some cockiness, and there's nothing I think I can't do. So let me just say to the audience, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, just because someone doesn't 24/7 walk around as though they're the most confident person in the world in a braggadocio way or an arrogant way, doesn't mean that they're not confident or it doesn't mean they can't go in a specific area of performance and be one of the best in the world. And so what I always tell my audiences is that you can be confident and humble.
Oh, couldn't agree with that more. I make the point, and I have to express this to lots of my, clients and students as well, is that you can be very inwardly confident. You can feel very powerful about yourself, but outwardly, in the way you speak, in the way you present yourself, in the way you conduct yourself around friends, family, teammates, etc., outwardly, you can be rather humble and modest. Because, as you point out, the media loves to play up the arrogance, the swagger, the hey, look at me aspect of some naturally outspoken athletes. A lot of the rest of us get the idea that, oh boy, I don't really like the way that guy or that gal presents herself. I don't want to be like that. So I'm not going to cultivate confidence on the inside because I'm afraid it'll change me into some sort of arrogant, conceited individual that I don't care to be. But it doesn't have to be like that. We have seen in the media outspoken, rather arrogant athletes. Conor McGregor is an example. Richard Sherman, Deion Sanders, two football players, going back to a young man named Cassius Clay, later known as Muhammad Ali, who was an outspoken individual. And to him, it made perfect sense to say, yes, I'm going to knock out so-and-so in the 4th round. Right. And most people looking at him saying, well, that's kind of conceited of you to say. That's not very nice. That's not socially graceful. But for every guy like Ali, who is a naturally outspoken person, who will put his feelings out there expressed, there are just as many quietly confident people like Drew Brees, like the Manning brothers. The list goes on and on. There's so many of them out there that we don't know who they are because they do not call attention to themselves. So just as you put it, I'll repeat, you can be a very confident individual. You can have that sense of certainty about yourself in your job, in your profession, as you pursue your sport or your art or your passion. You can be very confident on the inside and also humble and modest on the outside. And I think you got to have both. You got to have that confidence on the inside if you're going to perform. And it's good to be kind of modest if you want to have some friends.
That's exactly right. Which ties us back to the concept of, and you brought it up now, but you also brought it up a few minutes ago, about how we underperform, right? That friction brings us down. And I just want to kind of put that in the place of perfectionism. And I think people listening to this, as I work with people, I find that they are so analytical and so striving to be perfect that they beat themselves up because they're not perfect enough. And this is what you said in the book. And then I'd love to have sort of your thought on it. You said, and it has to do with what stories you're telling yourself. You said there are disturbingly similar stories of talented and dedicated people ruining their careers because they cannot accept the simple truth that they will never be perfect. And then you go on to say, research shows that the highest achievers in any field are those with only moderate levels of perfectionism. Any thoughts?
I think the research confirms what I've seen just in a clinical, in my clinical work. People who are very, very, very perfectionistic are so good at focusing almost exclusively on their setbacks, mistakes, and imperfections that they build a level of physical tension, a level of emotional worry, which in turn inhibits their next performance. It's a form of sabotage, if you will.
Yeah.
Perfection is a wonderful thing to strive toward. We should all attempt to be absolutely freaking perfect every time we practice and every time we play. However, striving for perfection is one thing, and that's fine, but demanding perfection from yourself each and every time is a killer. When I say don't demand it, I simply mean if you don't achieve it, acknowledge that, forgive yourself for being an imperfect human, and get back to work and see what you can learn from your imperfection. See if you can be curious about it to the point where you can learn what it's teaching you, and that'll help you get closer and closer and closer.
Wow, I love that. Strive for perfectionism. It's a great thing, but none of us are going to be perfect. So don't demand it.
Right. Oh. Don't demand it when you don't achieve it. Okay.
Yes.
This is a tough thing for a lot of people to put into regular practice because we have a fairly results-oriented, perfectionistic, striving culture here in America, North America, most of the industrialized world. And we haven't given the same degree of respect and appreciation for a little compassion and how far that can go in keeping you energized.
I love that. A little bit of compassion, a little bit of empathy. Ooh, if I locked on to the failures I've had over the past 25 years of building, especially in the beginning years of building my business and trying to write a book and losing in the early days or 20 years ago, having my car repossessed and trying to build my business, and it was all going backwards. Had I stayed locked on to all the failures, the missteps, the mistakes, and so forth, there's no way I'd be where I am today. Had I given in to those beliefs, but I kept believing that something was possible if I was willing to be persistent, if I was willing to keep working at it. And so what I want to point to is we all have a filter system, and you talk about the sewer cycle. You talk about how we have selective thinking. And I was just thinking, you have to accept your successes and wins. And when you accept those, it will drive up your confidence. I'll just tell you, many years ago, I started a company. I had 50 sales reps, and I had a team of people making phone calls at night to set up appointments for these sales reps. One of the people that was doing it was a lady named Sheila. She was such a sweet lady and so forth, but she could outperform everybody else making these cold calls to set up appointments every night. I would come in the next morning, look at her stats and go, Sheila, you're amazing. What are you doing that is making this possible? Her response was constantly, oh, TJ, if you really knew who I was, you wouldn't say that. And I remember at the time thinking, why would you say that to yourself? I would always think, own it. So I tell my kids, even in a moment of mistake in athletics, they're all pretty good at athletics. I say, own the moment, own it, regardless. Let go of what just happened and go own the next move. And so it's that selective thinking is critical to someone's success. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's too bad Sheila had been socialized over the course of her life to discount, disregard her successes and her progress, and to overemphasize her all too human failings. That's unfortunate, and that's why becoming a confident performer sometimes requires that you resist a little socialization. And there's a whole chapter in the Confident Mind book that describes the 7 deadly sins of socialization, beliefs that are part of our social fabric, unfortunately, that encourage us to be overly analytical, overly self-critical, too darn logical analytical and mechanical when the world that we live in actually requires a little artistry, a little compassion, a little empathy, and the ability to, at times, ignore things. To be, the term I use is constructively delusional. Now, I'm not talking about being delusional, going up to the top of a building and thinking you can sprout wings and fly. I'm talking about being delusional enough to think that even though we're 20 points down in the middle of the third quarter, we got a chance to win. And we got a chance to win because we can do these things with the ball, and because our defense can do those things against the opponent. We have to be constructively delusional enough that we allow ourselves to play as well as we possibly can, regardless of the circumstance.
Just this morning. So yesterday in basketball practice, my daughter, I know you have a couple daughters, I think, right? Is that right? I read that in the book. Yeah. So my daughter is playing basketball. They both go up for the rebound. They come down, and one of the top players on the team, very athletic girl, comes down on my daughter's ankle, twists her ankle. She comes into school this morning with crutches. They say she's going to probably be out for 6 weeks. The next text I got from my daughter was that the team is saying essentially this: our season is over. Mm-hmm. My response to her, if you could see my text, it would be, don't ever say that out loud. You have to be a little bit delusional. But she has 10 rebounds, 10 assists every game, and 10 points or more every game. That's a big difference. I go, then you as a team need to figure out, hey, how can each of us tweak what we're doing a little bit to make up the difference? Why would you just say, hey, our season's over? At least give yourself a chance, and it starts with the words you say. Any thoughts about that?
It starts with the words you say to yourself. It starts with the stories that you say to yourself. Yeah. I've dealt with injured athletes. I'm meeting up with one in a few hours right here. Mm-hmm. And I get them to be constructing a script for themselves about a wonderful return to competitive form and a wonderful resurgence of the team. And I tell the rest of the team, okay, now how great would this sound, or how great would this look as a headline in the newspaper or on the team website? Season-ending surge, propels what's your daughter's team's name?
They're the Wolves. The Wolves.
Yeah. Season-ending surge propels the Wolves to state title. Why not construct for yourself one of those wonderful Cinderella scenarios where you, as the underdog, because you've lost perhaps your early season scoring leader or whatever, what a cool story that would make.
Totally.
To see, to think about. That's late season surge coming through in the clutch, beating the top ranked team in the tournament. How cool would that be? Can you allow yourself to generate some excitement and momentarily set aside any sense of quote unquote realism that you might have? Well, it's not realistic to think that we could do that. Well, wait a minute. Are you sure it's not realistic? Are you sure you're not just justifying some negativity by saying, well, I'm just being realistic? When it really gets down to it, without trying to get too philosophical here, reality is a pretty darn fluid thing.
It is.
And we're constructing our own realities minute by minute by minute. How about constructing for yourself a reality in which the Wolves do go on that late season surge, as opposed to the reality that you are actually constructing for yourself right now by saying, oh, our season's going down the tubes. We have no hope now. Take your pick. Which reality do you want?
That's it. Which reality do you want? And you always, Viktor Frankl, right, taught us you always have that choice to focus on what you're going to focus on. And you say in the book, The Confident Mind, everybody needs to get this book. It's powerful, full of stories, full of research. And the way that you wrote it keeps you engaged with thinking and seeing it. You really color the images really well in your book. So I congratulate you on this book. You say in the book, envisioning the future, creating your own deja vu experience, which is exactly what you were just talking about. And you also use this as the title in that area where you talk about what you just described. Is it real or is it delusional? And you talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy. And later in the book, in that area, you talk about Lady Gaga, and you say this, I'll just quote it here. Lady Gaga maintained a vision of her eventual stardom long before her breakout commercial success. Quote, she would say, I used to walk down the street like I was an effing star, she told the Rolling Stone magazine for her first cover story in 2009. Quote, I operate from a place of delusion. I want people to walk around delusional about how great they can be, and then to fight so hard for it every day that the lie begins to become or becomes a truth. So well said.
Yeah, she'd be a great psychologist if she wanted to change careers.
For sure. I wrote in If You Think You Can several years ago, Jim Carrey, who said this, which is similar. I've always believed in magic. When I was doing something in this town, LA, I'd go up every night, sit on Mulholland Drive, look out at the city, stretch out my arms and say, everybody wants to work with me. I'm a really good actor. I have all kinds of great movie offers. I just keep repeating these things over and over and over, literally convincing myself that I had a couple movies lined up. I drive down that hill ready to take on the world going, quote, movie offers are out there for me. I just don't hear them yet.
Yeah. Right. The actual structure of that language is very, very important. And I hope all your listeners get this. The language that we just heard, the offers are out there. People want to work with me. Everything is in the present tense, as opposed to, I think I'll get some offers someday.
That's right.
People will want to work with me someday. No, there was a sense of immediacy and talking to yourself about what you want as if you have it in the present tense, in the first person, is a pretty powerful way to energize oneself and prepare oneself to keep going. That kind of, intentional, deliberate, productive self-talk sometimes can seem, fake or contrived, or as we've been saying, delusional. But the science tells us that the people who use it actually perform better than when they don't. One of the neatest pieces of research that I mentioned in the book actually comes from another book. Comes from a book entitled Endure, written by a Canadian, Alex Hutchinson. Hutchinson himself was a middle distance runner in his college days. He qualified for the Canadian Olympic trials in the 1,500 meter run. But during his college days, a sports psychologist came and told him and all his young teammates about this kind of self-talk. And as a lot of young, healthy people do, they just sort of thought this stuff was nuts. I'm not going to bother with that. It's just a bunch of fluff. Yeah. Fast forward 25, 30 years, Hutchinson now has a PhD. Hutchinson has been researching the curiously elastic limits of human endurance for decades. He's looked at nutrition. He's looked at training methods. He's looked at equipment and, yes, looked at psychology. And he's come across some research where trained cyclists performing a time to exhaustion test were trained and educated in how to do this kind of self-talk, and then retested a few weeks later. an 18% improvement in their time to exhaustion compared to a control group who were not trained in these self-talk techniques, who made no changes at all despite their training. So it really made Hutchinson scratch his head and say, you know, if I could go back in time and talk to my 20-year-old, somewhat cocky self, I would tell him to engage in this kind of motivational self-talk consistently and honestly, and believe in it, because we're on very good scientific grounds to say this actually changes your energy output, your endurance, your human performance.
Totally agree. I just feel like listening to you talk, I'm a couple years behind you, but we're cut from a similar cloth around this stuff. I just think you really do have to lead with your thoughts. What is your expectations? When you go through a negative event, is it a problem or is it an opportunity? And the delusional will say, no, there's probably something I can learn here. There's an opportunity here that can propel me forward, or maybe they find one that will work. Versus someone that will say, no, this is a problem, and then they just go into the fetal position. It's always a thought. So I always tell people, and I get your take on this, I always say, shrink the bad and enlarge the good. What depressed people have a tendency to do is shrink the good and blow out of proportion the bad. You always have a choice in which way you're going to focus. Any thoughts there?
Well, that's very true. The depressive triad is the constellation of thoughts that circles around everything is bad.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to change. Mm-hmm. And it's all my fault. Now, the idea that nothing is going to change, that's a choice that people make. You can say to yourself, well, nothing's going to change, same thing's going to happen. Or you can say, well, that bad incident did indeed happen, but it happened that one time.
Yep.
You see it as a temporary event. You can say to yourself, well, everything is messed up. Or you can say, yeah, this aspect of my performance and that aspect of my performance are not really good at the moment or weren't really good at that time. You can keep those mistakes or those setbacks or those difficulties in their proper, rather limited perspective, rather than seeing them as global entities. So you got to keep your problems temporary in your own mind. You have to keep them limited in terms of where they occur. And you also have to tell yourself, instead of it's all my fault and this is just the way I am, you have to tell yourself, no, those problems, those difficulties do not represent me. They don't tell the whole truth.
Yes.
I'm different from that. Even to the point of saying, wow, some really weird, fluky things happened during this game, and we didn't win. As opposed to, boy, we really stunk up the place. So You have to keep those problems temporary, limited, and non-representative, as opposed to seeing them as permanent problems that are affecting everything in a global kind of way. And indeed, it is personal to you. You are identifying with them.
Love it. I often say you can't fake confidence. I think in the moment you got to fake it. It's the delusional side. You got to fake it till you make it. I don't like the phraseology only because I don't want to fake anything. But like you said, reality is really fluid. So fake it till you make it. But I say to develop confidence, yes, you kind of have to fake it till you make it a little bit in the beginning, but you got to follow it up with developing your skills, your competencies. And it's going to take some action and some discipline. You can't just rely on each time I'm going to fake it. I don't want to go to a surgeon that just does well every once in a while, just faking it till you make it. I want someone that has turned it over to the subconscious, free flowing, natural thought, created the myelin sheath or whatever that creates those synaptic connections that speed faster through between the neurons and so forth, to such a way that they don't even have to think about how well they're performing. They do it naturally. And so I just want to emphasize, You can't just go out there and act fake and think that that's going to be sustained. You got to go develop your skills, develop your thought processes so that it is sustained over time. Any thoughts about action or whatever?
Take the actions to build your skills when you can. When it is time to perform, forget about building and think about releasing, letting go, spending the money that you have saved. Those are two different states of mind, and those are two different forms of discipline, if you will.
Right.
You know, the discipline to look at yourself honestly, to identify your weaknesses, to be somewhat analytical and self-critical. There are times in your practice when you need to do that, but there are also some times in your practice where you need to say, okay, I've made some corrections. Now I'm going to practice being very loose, very reactive, almost unconscious, and I'm going to get myself comfortable with that. Because when it comes time to step into the arena, whether it's the boardroom, whether it's the sales negotiation, whether it's the Super Bowl, the Wimbledon final, you can't be in the process of, okay, let's see how much better I can get. You got to be in the process, okay, let's let out everything that I've been working up, okay? This is when I switch from development to delivery. And I want to be talking myself through a process where I kind of take an inventory about all the work I've done and all the success I've achieved and all the competence that I've built up. And now I'm in this situation. I see my opponent. I see the situation. I know the arena. I know the demands and characteristics. And now I'm going to decide that I'm enough. I'm going to decide that I'm enough in that moment. Maybe in a perfect world, I would have done more training, or I would have done more practice, or I would have done more study in a perfect world, but we're not living in the perfect world. We got to perform now. You always give yourself the best chance if you come into that performance with the conviction, I'm enough, I'm enough, I'm enough. That does free you up considerably.
I love that. I'm enough. I'm enough. I'm enough. When I prepare a speech, I'll take hours to prepare it. But the moment I step on stage, I realize this is not the time to prepare anymore. This is not the time to worry about whether I'm prepared or not. Now it's time to turn that part of my brain on that says, own it, TJ. Go get it, TJ. Trust your instinct. Speak from your heart. And you know what? It comes out just fine without me being over analytical about every detail. And if I'll just let go of that detail in the moment, I'm telling you, Doc Z, I'm telling you, it just makes a difference by doing the best you can to be certain in preparation, but then let go, like you said, let go and go do.
Very, very true. Human performance always seems to be maximized when there is this minimum of self-analysis, self-awareness. Human performance always seems to be better when certain parts of your brain are on vacation. And the neuroscience literature is actually very clear on this. I mean, brain scans of people in highly concentrated, effective states show a rather economical brain. There are a few areas that are lit up because they're the ones that are important for the task at hand, but everything else is pretty darn quiet because it's unnecessary. It's when you got too much brain working, that's when the parts of your brain that are unnecessary to the performance of a task, they just get in the way, You think about these guys like Alex Honnold who climbed El Cap without a rope. He is able to suspend, turn off, ramp the volume down of so many of the common fears that most of us walk around with all the time. In that state of, all I can say is utter and complete trust, his ability, his gripping ability, his very well developed sense of balance and body control can operate at its fullest expression. And that is what allows him to do things that most of us mere mortals just drop our jaws when we see.
I love that. Powerful book. And I know that we're touching only the surface of what you have in this book. It's rich, filled with so much research and examples that anyone can take and use to improve their performance. Protecting your confidence every day, no matter what. How to defend against threats and outright attacks. You say there's basically 3 steps, and anything you want to add to it. Step number 1 is acknowledge it. Step number 2, silence it. And step number 3, replace it. Any other thoughts on protecting that confidence day by day?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about the arguments that you might have had with your little brother or little sister, or, you know, some kid down the block, you know, and you get into an argument and somebody says something and somebody says something else, and it goes back and forth. And eventually the person who gets the last word in is the winner of the argument. Your job as a performer, ladies and gentlemen, is to get the last word in against that voice of fear, doubt, and worry, the same way you want to get the last word in when you're having an argument about which restaurant to go to, or who makes the best pizza. You want to get the last word in. So yeah, you got to be sensitive to acknowledge, oh, here's this voice, here's this attack, and I'm going to stop it. I'm going to step back and I'm going to say, no, this is over. You're done. And then I'm going to replace that voice with some of the thoughts that I've been carefully cultivating about my quality effort, my successes day by day, my progress. I've been journaling on that. So I got a lot to draw on, and that's going to be my last word. That's going to be my last word. And I may have to go through that little process. Recognize, stop, replace. Acknowledge, stop, replace. I may have to go through that process 50 or 100 times a day. And as long as I am doing that, I'm winning the moment. I'm winning that moment. I'm winning that little first victory right there. And if I keep doing that, I can't be stopped. Because I'll tell you something, people, everybody else that you compete with, they got the same amount of negative chatter that you do. And if you can just do a 5%, 10% better job of acknowledging it, stopping it, replacing it than your opponent does, your competitor does, well, you just created an advantage for yourself. So even though it might seem like work, it is literally creating an advantage for yourself compared to all the other people who are after the same thing you are.
Wow. Well said. I just wrote down here, last word, meaning that the last word is going to be what you want, not what you don't want, right? Exactly. We want to move to what we do want. What is that future image? What is that future phrase? Words trigger images, which trigger emotion. So we want to make sure we get the right words in place that trigger the right pictures. Listen, it was great to have you. I feel like I would love to just sit in your office there. You look like you have a beautiful office. I would first look at all the pictures in there and ask a lot of questions and be curious behind you. But then to sit down and just enjoy time with you, we could spend a lot more time going over the concepts that you spend much of your life cultivating and teaching and coaching high achievers around the world, especially those at West Point and so forth. How can people get your book?
A couple ways. You can order it through my website, drnatezinsser.com.
Okay, we'll put that up there. Yep.
And if you simply Google the title, Confident Mind, HarperCollins, the publisher, that'll bring you to a link from which you can order the book via Amazon or Barnes & Nobles or whichever online retailer you choose to patronize.
No, great. Everyone, go get your copy of this book. Visit, give the website one more time, would you?
drnatezinsser.com.
drnatezinsser.com, or as people refer to you, Doc Z. Did I get that right? Doc Z.
You got that right.
Okay. Well, listen, in closing, what would you say about deciding to be different? That's one of your later chapters, deciding to be different. Any last thoughts there? And then we'll come to a close.
Sure. If you want to be the best in a given field, or if you want to be better than most of the other people in a given field, by definition, does that mean you're asking yourself to really be different? And so it's incumbent upon you to decide to think a little differently than everybody else. You can't be the best at anything if you're just like everybody else. You can't be the best in the world unless you think differently than the best in the world. And unfortunately, so much of our primary and secondary and even undergraduate schooling is all about teaching us how to fit in and be normal and not rock boat. So let's think about differentiating ourselves from our competitors, from our opponents, certainly in terms of the quality of work that we put in, the preparation that we undergo. But let's think about differentiating ourselves from our opponents and our competitors by the quality of our thinking. Let's think more effectively, constructively, productively than they do. And if we can do that, we will always be creating, as I said before, an advantage. Let's go cultivate that advantage. Let's win that first victory, and the other victories will likely follow through.
Love it. Love it. It just makes me think that what you just described is that secret of the slight edge, that slight little difference that makes all the difference. By getting the first victory, getting the thought process right, focused on what you ultimately want, moment to moment versus what you don't do. Powerful stuff. Dr. Nate Zinsser, thank you for being willing to come on the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast today.
Well, thank you, TJ, for the opportunity to connect with your listeners. I really appreciate it, and I hope everybody has a great winter, great spring. And as I like to say at the end of some speeches, if I don't run into you again, have a great life.
Love it. Thank you very much.